chorus you wrote about served you very well. The best of that I wrote long ago. If only I could finish it. Just one true sentence to cap it off. I stand here at this table trying one day after another, but nothing comes, those goddamn doctors with their blasts to my brain. The fucking torture of it. They've wiped me out, nothing to call up, no reserves. They're trying to keep you from killing yourself. But what have they given me to keep me going? The books and stories I promised myself to write will never be written. What does a man of my age care about? Being healthy, working good at his calling, eating and drinking with the people he cares about, good sex, traveling to the places he loves. I'm denied all of them. Why should I stick around? The hall phone's bugged, and so is this room. Nurse Susan feeds reports to the FBI. Papa, you've got to get over this craziness. Crazy, am I? Well, just be careful what you say when she's in the room. Why would the FBI? I write suspicious books that take place in foreign countries. France and Italy, communist Cuba and fascist Spain. I lived among the Cuban communists all those years. I shoot guns. I speak languages J. Edgar Hoover doesn't understand. My lawyer, my doctor, my banker, all of them in cahoots with him. They've stripped my bank account. I probably can't pay my hospital bill. They're after me for back taxes. I've tried to live the right way, but they only want it their way. So I'm giving my life back to them. They can take my life and stick it. Here is my life with a bullet in it. That's what they want? Take it. It's all yours. The phobias, delusions, fears, obsessions hadn't changed. The words were the very words I had heard again and again. Ernest, listen. We need you here. A world of people need you here. Too late, Pecos. I've got my exit visa. Tears were in his eyes now. It had grown dark, and the street lamps outside the window were reflecting into the room. Ernest bent his head against his chest and closed his eyes. Hospital sounds were coming from the corridor. The siren of an ambulance entering the hospital grounds cut into the room, its whirling red light flashing the window as it passed by. There were muffled announcements summoning doctors. I felt very close to Ernest. He was indeed Papa. He was in pain, but the doctors were not relieving it, not capable. Nor was I. Ernest raised his head and nodded a few times, as if acknowledging some inner thought or yearning or admission. Pecos, he said in a soft, barely audible voice. Tell me this. How does a young man know when he falls in love for the very first time? How can he know that it will be the only true love of his life? How can he possibly know? How can he know? He looked at me intently, as if searching for an answer. He took off his glasses, placed them on the bedside table, and wiped his eyes with the top edge of the sheet, leaving the sheet covering his face. From under the sheet, he repeated, How can he possibly know? The room was dead quiet. There were faraway street sounds. Pecos, Ernest said from his foxhole, I guess I better take a little snooze, or Nurse Susie will snitch on me. With any luck, maybe I'll dream of Paris. I sat there for a spell. It was time for me to go. I had a plane to catch, but I felt disloyal leaving him in this caged room. This fine man who had given so much of himself to wind up with so little. I was grieving for him and the scant life that was being parceled out to him in this unjust endgame. This man who had stood his ground against charging water buffalo, who had flown bombing missions over Germany, who had refused to accept the prevailing style of writing, but, enduring poverty and rejection, had insisted on writing in his own unique way. This man, my deepest friend, was now afraid. Afraid that the FBI was after him, that his body was disintegrating, that his friends had turned on him, that living was no longer an option. Most of all, I grieved at my helplessness to rescue him from this raging storm. He was asleep now. I sat there remembering what he had once said about dreaming. When I dream of afterlife in heaven, the action always takes place in the Paris Ritz. It's a fine summer night. I knock back a couple of martinis at the bar, Camden side. Then there's a wonderful dinner under a flowering chestnut tree in Le Petit Jardin, a little garden that faces the grill. After a few brandies, I wander up to my room and slip into one of those huge Ritz beds. They're all made of brass. There's a bolster for my head the size of the Graf Zeppelin and 4 square pillows filled with real goose feathers, 2 for me, and 2 for my quite heavenly companion. If I stayed another day, 2 days, more, I could not bring him respite, only aggravate my own despair. Reluctantly, I stood up and crossed the room, the stab of his thin, seeking voice forever in my ear. How can he know that it will be the only true love of his life? How can he know? I opened the door. The corridor was empty. I quietly let the door close to its latch, hoping my friend was dreaming of being in his favorite room at the Ritz, on the garden side, in a huge brass bed with a heavenly companion who, I'm sure, is Hadley. 2 weeks after I left him, without completing the prescribed cycle of ECTs, the Mayo doctors released Ernest from the hospital. 1 week after that, in his house in Ketchum, Idaho, he took his life. 50 years after his death, in response to a Freedom of Information petition, the FBI released its Hemingway file. It revealed that beginning in the 1940s, J. Edgar Hoover had placed Ernest under surveillance because he was suspicious of Ernest's activities in Cuba. Over the following years, agents filed reports on him and tapped his phones. The surveillance continued all through his confinement at St. Mary's Hospital. It is likely that the phone in the hall outside his room was tapped, and that Nurse Susan may well have been an FBI informant.